The networks that we were building had been bilaterally connected. Like the satellite network was connected to the ARPANET, for example. The packet radio net was connected to the ARPANET.
I pretty quickly got involved in doing the work on the gateways, which were the machines that connected the networks. I did the software. That was really what became the internet, was the ability to connect multiple networks. And then I installed gateways between the ARPANET and the packet radio net, and between the ARPANET and the Atlantic Satellite Network.
And I thought it was important to show that we could actually get all three networks communicating with each other. SRI International had this packet radio van that they had built, this sort of nondescript looking bread truck. November 22nd, 1977. They would drive around the Bayshore 101.
The TCP protocol required retransmission. So if you lost a packet, it had to retransmit. And you'd see a series of numbers. This was the way we demonstrated. Just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It was just a pattern on the screen. You go into the tunnel, blink, it stops. You come out of the tunnel, it continues with no errors.
They were radiating packets that went through a gateway into the ARPANET. They went all the way across the ARPANET through an internal satellite hop to Norway, and then down by landline to University College London to another gateway and a satellite ground station from Goonhilly Downs through the packet satellite net to Etam, West Virginia in the United States. And then from there they went through another gateway into the ARPANET again to USC Information Sciences Institute. So there's only about a 400-mile, difference between the SRI International and USC ISI, but the packets went about 100,000 miles back and forth across the Atlantic and the US twice. So amazingly, that actually worked. And for me, it was a very important milestone in demonstrating this TCP/IP idea was actually functional.
It was a lot of working late at night. Are we going to get this running? Are we going to get this running? I mean, it was like totally non-obvious. And especially network experiments, there's so many different pieces involved, and all those pieces have to be up at the same time in order for anything to go through. And then you said, oh, finally we got it, that packet went all the way through. And it's like, yeah, do you have any proof? You have any snazzy user interface? The answer's like, no.
All right, Dodger fans, brace yourselves. If you can't bear to hear a baseball metaphor during World Series week, just put your fingers in your ears, because we're talking about Raffi Krikorian as a man who's rounded the bases doing tech for the Democratic National Committee, for Uber and Twitter, and then sliding into home plate with the Emerson Collective. What he's moderating today is the Internet Megaphone, about who gets dialed up to 11 and who gets muted down to 0. Take it away.
Hello. Welcome to my faux living room. 1,800 of my closest friends. I'm not sure how I got the coolest panel in the building, no offense to all the internet founding fathers in the audience. But let me start first with Bran Ferren. He's an American technologist, an artist, architectural designer. This goes on very long. He used to run Disney Imagineering and is currently the Chief Creative Officer for Applied Minds. Next, we'll go to Jameela Jamil. She wears many hats. She's a writer, an actress, a radio presenter, and an activist. She's widely regarded as a body neutrality activist and is very well known for her activism, especially against popular diet products. Oh, and you may have seen her on television. Next, we'll go to Patrisse Cullors. She's an American artist and activist. She's one of my heroes. She's a co-founder of the Black Lives Matter movement. And then finally, last but not least, Katelyn Ohashi is a viral sensation. She's a former UCLA gymnast. She's a 6-time All-American, 4-time member of U.S. Gymnastics junior national team, 2011 junior national champion, and the winner of 2013 American Cup. The longest intro I have to do today. So the topic of our panel is sort of the Internet Megaphone. And I think the way I described it to the panelists was sort of like the Internet's this place where the promise, at least, is that it sort of like flattens the landscape. Like we can all talk to whoever we want. We have equal access to everyone and everything. My personal story here is that I was one of the original engineers on the Twitter team. I became the VP of engineering of the infrastructure of Twitter, trying to make it worldwide, scalable, reliable. And one of the things we thought about a lot is that Twitter could flatten the landscape. And so you could see the big things that occurred. You could see earthquakes that happen, and you can also celebrate on someone's prom night, for example, or you can celebrate a gymnastics event online. But we've also seen sort of the other side of the internet. My work at the Democratic Party, happy to talk about that at some point. But I want to turn over to our panelists first, and sort of maybe we could just go down the line and talk about like maybe 2 minutes of sort of like, we were promised this utopia on the internet. We were promised this place where we could talk to anyone and everything. How's that worked for you? Maybe start with Bran.
Well, no one ever promised me that, so I must have been sick. But for me, it's been fascinating to be alive watching this thing evolve. Whether you think of it as a new communications medium, I think the internet got really interesting when it became good enough for storytelling, so that people could tell their personal stories and others. It's to me more of an internet sousaphone, to the extent that it's not predictable. It's hard to learn how to use, and you give a speech and 1 million people listen on an obscure topic, which is astonishing, and then you watch people attempt to do something viral, and 127 people listen to it. And so I think that's part of what, to me, has been the fun and the excitement, is watching it evolve, the good and the bad, and the fact that we're kind of at a moment in society now where people are realizing that perhaps some sense of responsibility or some sense of direction or oversight, rather than being harmful, is in fact necessary.
I personally find that the social media aspect of the internet started off as this moment where we had access to community, like worldwide, global community, but unfortunately it very quickly turned into a marketplace because human beings have to commodify absolutely everything, and therefore it became this rather insidious and scary place, especially for young people or impressionable people, where shame tactics were used and are used a lot in order to sell people things. And the way that algorithms hunt you down via your age and your gender, I think some of these things are problematic to me. So while I love the internet, I spend way too much of my time on it, and I love social media, I also spend a lot of my career now personally combating the dark side of the internet that I think you were sort of somewhat alluding to, because I think that the marketplace of it has overtaken the humanity aspect of what the internet was supposed to do.
Hey everybody, it's really good to be here. It is always strange to be up on like this panel thing and then have people watching you from the other side. So just an honor to have this conversation to celebrate 50 years of the internet. It feels like it's been around forever. 50 years is not that long. There's so much more to learn from it. And I think for our movement, the internet has been such an interesting place because in so many ways, traditional media was not carrying out the promises of sharing what was happening on the ground for people most vulnerable. And social media in particular has become a megaphone for so many movements like Black Lives Matter or Me Too or March for Our Lives, where the lost and the forgotten were able to be seen and represented. And also with that, and that's, I think, in any place, in any industry, vulnerability lies in. And so, something that we've been really thinking about inside of Black Lives Matter, inside the organization in particular, is the disinformation campaign that is happening. And how many times we've had to say, hey, that's not actually Black Lives Matter, that's actually this guy in Australia who started a page and got a lot of money off of the name, and then we found out that he was like rigging everybody. And so there's a vulnerability on the internet, I think, and on social media in particular, that I think in this moment really is sinister, and we have to be present for that as well. So as much as it's been a megaphone, it's also been this sinister place that as an organization and as a movement, we're not just sort of laying on our backs and letting it happen, but we're actively trying to combat it.
Hi. So I think it's kind of interesting because my career is kind of based on the internet, going viral with over 100 million views. So my life kind of changed, and it changed really fast. And I think we talk about so many times like being vulnerable on social media, but it's so one-sided because you only see half or maybe a quarter of someone's life, and you think that so accurately represents them. But the truth is, it doesn't. And I love social media because I like to use it to show most of myself. And I like being able to present my skin issues and what some other people might be dealing with, because I went through the same things and I felt so alone. But then there's this huge disconnect because we're so used to having conversations with people, and now no one has to listen on the internet. We can read it, but not really absorb it because everyone has their own opinion. And I like to say everyone's entitled to their opinion until you have your own, and you like to shut everyone else out. So then there's no face-to-face confrontation, and anyone is free to say whatever they want. It takes 2 seconds to scroll past someone's post, and it takes minutes out of your day to just type something so negative towards someone. And that's something everyone nowadays has to deal with, especially growing up and in the little non-utopia, dystopia of the internet. So, yeah.
We're in despair.
I mean, so what a lot of you have spoken about is just like we've lost some of our humanity as part of like being mediated through the internet. So like, how do we get that back? Like, how do you cut through the noise? How do you make sure that it doesn't, like, I'm worried if this world plays out the way you've all described, then like our kids are screwed, or my kids are screwed. I mean, how do we make sure that world doesn't happen? Like, how do we make sure we reconnect as people again, even though we're mediated by the internet?
Well, I don't think we're mediated by the internet. We're mediated by people on the internet, and there is a significant difference. And so I think those people on the internet that provide access, when I say access, I don't mean ISPs, but create a vehicle or platform or something else which people gather to, have to step up and take responsibility. I think the notion of, well, this is just, you know, life, everybody should be allowed to say anything and do anything. No, people shouldn't be allowed to harm people. People shouldn't be allowed to spread misinformation. And there needs to be a sense of responsibility where you basically take ownership of the fact that you are affecting people's lives. And in the process of doing that, you can't simply say, well, this is the Wild West and we're destroying what's great about the internet by saying it's not okay to be mean-spirited and hurt people.
Yeah, I do think the extraordinary amount of profit that comes from the internet to big businesses or individuals, it's so strange to me how little of that, you know, including the biggest platforms on the internet like YouTube and Google and Twitter and Facebook, etc., they don't spend enough of their billions on policing the internet and creating more of an easier way to report bullying or to report abuse or to report disinformation. I mean, we watched what happened between AOC and Mark Zuckerberg this week. There is just a kind of very hands-off approach when it comes to people's mental health, essentially. That's what we're dealing in, the well-being of people, the well-being of marginalized people, people's general sense of well-being. We don't take it seriously still as a society. It's still profit over all. And so I think that's why panels like this are very important, and I think it's vital that now we start to pour so much more of the profit of these giant companies into actual structures that protect people on the internet.
Yeah, I think also, you know, how we shape our culture is really important. And so this conversation around like, what do we do with the internet and what do we do with people on the internet that behave poorly or corporations who behave poorly, I think we have to create a new culture. And so part of that culture is what we do outside of the internet, how we respond, how we relate. Living in the current moment that we're in, we've seen so much hate. We've seen so many hate crimes, and that often was on the internet first, and that was able to foster, and we didn't stop it from happening. So I think there's a culture that we need to foster that is about how we're in connection to each other, that is a challenge to racism, to homophobia, to transphobia, to anti-black racism, to all the ways, ableism, all of these isms that really impact our ability to be in a relationship to each other, authentic relationship to each other, that then just gets amplified online because you don't have to face each other. And so I think we have to call for a new culture. And it's easy because the internet is a place where you can like dump and leave. It's easy to feel sort of like, oh, I don't have to deal with that, but we have to. Like our humanity is really relying on us to be honest, to be upfront, and to challenge the culture that's been created.
And we have to hold our world leaders and the people who dominate these platforms to task in order to make sure that they are responsible in that way.
I mean, is there something from both the top and the bottom? So like, there is like, we need to hold world leaders. We need to like make sure the platforms do the right thing. We need to sort of like change their incentives. Like, it's crazy that a huge fine can be levied on one of the platforms and their stock price goes up. Like, there's something clearly wrong with the way this world works right now. But at the same time, like, what can like just regular internet citizens do? Like, in a lot of ways, you all use the internet as a platform to express either, like, point out what truth is, express positivity, express change in some way. Is there an aspect of that, or is that a lost cause if it doesn't change at the top?
I don't think any of us would be doing what we do if it were a lost cause necessarily, but I do think that while it is of course important to hold the general public accountable, there are also, these are people with less privilege and less time to be able to do the right thing than those at the top, and it does filter down, you know, these things, they do bleed down the chain, and so therefore I still think the biggest responsibility is with those who have power and privilege and larger platforms to lead the way for everyone else, because as they decline in their lack of humanity, so do we.
But they're interlocked in a way that I think is important to note, that one of the underlying foundations of the internet was the ability to be anonymous. And I think those days have to be over. We have this model called the real world, where you're not, you have to prove your identity to rent a car, to have a bank account, to fly in an airplane, to do a whole bunch of things. And those rules were put in place because without it, people abuse it. And that's clearly what's happening on the internet. And the fact is, okay, should a person be allowed freedom of speech to say something hateful? Under many circumstances, absolutely. And that's a fundamental principle, which is important. However, should they be able to do it anonymously and without accountability and without that? That's a whole different situation. And so I think the idea that simply you have some given right to be anonymous on the internet, get rid of that and say that for a whole variety of things, you actually have to announce who you are, and we know who you are, and then let's see how many people exhibit the same behaviors, and you tune it around that. But I think part of the maturity is sort of saying, when you have the Wild West, there are consequences, and we're living those consequences now.
Yeah, it's not even just anonymous as well, it's false assumed identities. You know, you saw that with Black Lives Matter. You had white people posing as African Americans, saying problematic things to rile people up. I definitely get the same thing as a woman of color. I can't imagine how much you have to deal with on this.
I mean, I think this piece around how do we hold people on the internet accountable is actually a really important conversation, because it's tricky. And the ways that we hold people accountable in real life actually end up being often dangerous for some communities, right? So if we're talking about the way criminalization works, it's not actually created equal. Most people who are criminalized are Black and brown, who are queer and trans and women. And so if we apply those same tenets onto the internet, we're going to create something that has already happened. Many Black Lives Matter members are told that they are saying hate speech, right? And so there's this, I think there's this, I go back to the conversation about how we change our culture, which is how do we challenge racism? How do we challenge sexism and classism and homophobia? How do we challenge these big isms? And how do we then create a model that we want to live in, not the model that already exists, because the model that exists right now is not actually, it's a terrible model. It's a model that doesn't hold the right people accountable. It holds the people who are most vulnerable accountable. So this is a conversation that we're often talking about inside our own organization and inside of our movement, because it's exhausting being gaslighted on the internet. It's exhausting having white supremacists go after you, and never being held accountable, right? Or taking many, many years to hold them accountable. There's lots of social media platforms that will not be named that we went to and said, hey, we're being treated very poorly. We don't know what this is. You know, we soon to find out they were bots, and they were never challenged. They were never pushed back on. And so I think that we have to have a conversation about who gets held accountable and why, and how do we make sure that we are building that culture.
I also think that, you know, when it comes to solution, it's really important for us to get into the schools. Like, it's wonderful for us to be here today, but I think even younger, we need to get in and explain what the internet and social media is to young people, because there isn't enough information. This is the first generation that have ever been ahead of their parents when it comes to what it is that they're ingesting. They're no longer being guided along the way. They are way ahead, and their parents have no idea what they're looking at until they maybe read about it on the news, if it's really bad, if it's a dead person hanging from a tree. That was one of the first times that parents really found out what their children were looking at. You know, you don't know about the pornography they're watching, et cetera, et cetera. So we really need to vastly improve internet literacy for children, because they are our next generation, and they're growing up with terrible examples, and they're out in the Wild West with no example. They don't even have our... You know, we remember what it was like to just be human without the internet. They don't even have a memory of that. They're growing up on the internet that they do not yet understand.
And kids can get to places they shouldn't get to, which harms them for a whole variety of ways. And so you run into the tension between, do you create gated communities? And, for instance, having a gated community that allows kids, doesn't allow other people, and does that, great idea. You allow other types of gated communities, and it's a much less good idea, because it creates differences which are harmful. And so I personally think we need a thoughtful discussion about this. And I believe, look, if you are a person who has a set of interests which are not the norm, and which you wouldn't want kids seeing, and you wouldn't want a lot of adults seeing, great, there should be a place where you have the ability to do that, but not somewhere where my daughter is going to get to, and not somewhere where it is intrusive in the lives of people who don't wish to be intruded in that manner.
For sure. And I again, like, I think adding to that, the understanding of what they're seeing would help them, because even if children do stumble upon things, if they can at least understand that these things are fake, or they could understand Photoshop, or they could understand the lies behind pornography. I'm not talking about very small children like your daughter, but I just mean teenagers, for example, who are being exposed to this stuff. The knowledge would be so much power for them to at least have some semblance of understanding the manipulation at work. And so that's something that I campaign for as well.
Actually, I would love to know, like, given all your experiences, like, what do you tell the next generation of kids? Like, my favorite stat recently is something like 50% of kids under 11 have a smartphone. Like, I do everything I possibly can to make sure
Mine will have one at 43.
I'll do everything I possibly can to make sure my child never watches YouTube with autoplay turned on, for example. Like, but like, what do you tell the next generation, given your experiences, like how to protect themselves?
I was actually watching a speech about Gary Vee did on social media, and he was talking about how you can't cut back on social media for your kids because there's no backtracking with social media. So I thought it was kind of twisted, because I feel like as people, we had the ability to grow up somewhat, less me, without social media, but to be able to be solidified as a person before you rely on social media to create your self-worth in all your development, who you are as a person, I think that's extremely it comes from how you're raised, but also how you're taught by the people surrounding you. And I think that is extremely important, that we get told how to use it properly instead of letting just everyone run on social media freely.
And how do we do that without killing what's great about it? Because, for example, every time I get sort of spun of this and, how are the filters working with my daughter, and when I look at the apps that show me what she's seeing and so forth, great. But then again, wonderful things happen. A wonderful thing happened to me over the summer. We're at the house. I'm working late, as is not uncommon. I come back in the house at 11:30, and my daughter is on the computer rather than in bed and asleep. And I'm getting ready to, say, well, it's nice that you're in Minecraft and building your new castle and doing all of that. And I went up and I looked, and she was doing math quizzes with other kids in a competition in the middle of the night. She's never been that interested in math. This gave her a passion for math because she found other kids and formed a community. And you could have knocked me over with a feather because this was just not on my radar screen. And so, while on one level, we do need to be protective and have caution and do this much better. And by the way, identity may be the way you get access to those communities. So we know it's my daughter by biometrics, and she can't get somewhere she can't get, rather than learning to hack a password. But the fact that this opened up for her a joy and a passion for math with other kids in other countries and other parts of the world that she's never met, that is astonishing, and we need to not mess that up at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's why talking to them about it and helping them understand it would mean that we wouldn't necessarily have to so stringently protect it, like protect them from everything. It would just help them understand what they're seeing to make them less vulnerable to lies.
Yeah, it's literacy. And I think for me, I have a 3-year-old, but nobody knows because he's not on the internet.
They know now.
Well, yeah, like people know, but like when I meet people, they're like, oh, I've never seen you post about your kid. And I made a really conscious decision, even though I use social media so much, that I'm not gonna post about my kid because I want my kid to have agency and consent to when he makes a decision on when he wants to make his first post, or we do that collectively. And I think that has been such a really like raw experience with the internet because it is so new that we forget that we can actually set boundaries. We forget that we can take pause. We forget that we actually get to dictate what happens to the internet because we have been so curated by it. And so I think that's a really important opportunity too. You know, I'm not gonna tell any parents get to do what they want with their child, but I personally have seen it be really important. Or even, you know, it can be really easy to stick a screen in front of a kid. It's hard being a parent. It's a lot of work. And so like, what are the boundaries we set when we do that? And then also how much does my kid see me consume the screen? That was really important. I remember like my child being 9 months old and I think I was working and he was like in the bassinet and I was like working on it and I was like, wow, let me like take a moment because they are seeing everything that we do. And so I think there's literacy, but there's also modeling. How do we want to be? And how do we want our children to see us? And how do we want the next generation to see us? Right now, there's not the best models, but then there are some really amazing models. And I think we need to be kind of reminded that in 50 years from now, we're gonna be celebrating 100 years. And we can really shape what those next 50 years look like.
Such a nerd.
I want to go back one question, or one point, which is something, and I apologize to everyone in the audience, the iPad seems to have run out of batteries, so if you have questions, sorry, I'm just going to wing it. We touched on this real name and real identity point, and it's come up throughout the day. So I'd love to know from like the activists in the room for a second, like, how do you think about that? Because like there's clearly there's the place where like real names and protesting might not exactly collide well.
Yeah, I mean, it's so challenging. It's a little bit like the chicken or the egg, because also this idea of a real name, like there's folks who are born in a certain gender and that's not the gender they agree with, and so they change their names. And maybe that, you know, when Facebook was really doing all the real name stuff, a lot of trans folks were basically pushed off that platform because they were using the name that they gave themselves, not the name that was given to them. And so I think this goes back to my point around we have to challenge the isms. We have to challenge these big...
treat the cause, not the symptom.
Yes, we have to challenge the big oppression points because otherwise we are just literally putting Band-Aids. And so it has to be a more thoughtful conversation around, maybe it's not about real names, maybe it's something else. And then that really challenges the rest of the systems that have been created that we may need to say, this system doesn't work in this. This is not the best system for us anymore.
I mean, I agree with everything you just said, so I don't know how much I should add to that. I personally am someone who chooses to take, you know, and I have a level of privilege, but even before I did, I'm someone who's chosen to do all of my activism very publicly for the last 14 years, and I don't know where I'm going with this other than just to say that, I found that very effective, and I found the people behind me who have been able to, be lucky enough to feel safe in putting their name and their face, the activism and their signatures on change.org and all the petitions that I get signed. I found that to be very effective, but that's something that that's how I personally choose to use the internet. I do understand both of your points, and I have no idea how to navigate this conversation. Over to you. It's nothing worse than people who bullshit in front of a crowd.
But
it's too big a subject.
I think it's important that these are not black and white issues.
Yeah.
And the fact is, there are tiers of identity, such as you have a social security number. It's not public, but it's necessary to pay your taxes. It's necessary for certain jobs. It's necessary for this. And so on one level, there's your name. At the same time, there can be the dog with fuzzy hair, which, you have a whole variety of things. But I think it all gets back to what level of accountability is needed when. And so, there are trust systems such as eBay developed where this person is probably not a crook if they have this great feedback and, there are ways to hack that, et cetera. But the reality is each circumstance and set of circumstances will have along with it a different set of responsibilities. And I think we have to be flexible and make different rules. And by the way, make special exceptions for individuals or communities or as one steps back and say, these people are really being disadvantaged by that, and we have to do something special for them.
And we have to lead by example, as you were saying, in order to treat the cause and not the symptom. Those of us with power and with privilege, it is kind of on us. It is our duty to use that to set a good example and help make sure that we are putting the correct messaging out into society, because we've personally seen how much that can impact people's lives. And so that's something that I take very, very seriously. And I wish more people who had our platforms would, because we desperately need that, and we desperately need more people who are willing to talk openly about the really important things. But this is how I think we're going to fix each other.
Well, I've seen Instagram kick people that aren't active online off. So what if they looked deeper and saw what these people were actually posting about, and being able to target the inside and whether they're using it for their good or their bad? Because I feel like they're kicking the wrong people off, essentially.
Yeah. Who are they kicking off?
Just people that aren't on social media. I've seen a lot of people like, Instagram just deleted my thing because I haven't posted in this long or something like that. And it's like, what about the people that are just on there using it? Yeah.
Got some questions?
I got a phone. I am resisting an urge to send text messages from it. But one of the questions, which I think is applicable to people who have many followers on social media platforms, is the like button, friend or foe?
I think
The
like button.
I think it's gotten rid of the point of social media. It was essentially created so we could share about our life, and now it's what will get likes. It's not even what we're passionate about anymore. I know for me, when I post something that's art related, it gets 2 likes versus a selfie or my ESPN body shoot photos. So those got a decent amount compared to the things that I really care about. I said, there was a picture that said, validating beauty is becoming ugly. And hardly anyone liked it. But it's so true, because the fact of the matter is we're constantly validating what someone looks like based off a picture, and that's all people see, and that's how we feel, and that's the only thing people care about.
I think it's faux. I think it breeds a pat on the back culture that we don't need, we could live without. It took away the sense of freedom we had when social media and when the internet first started. I think maybe we have too much feedback on the internet sometimes, too many comments, too many opinions. I think it would be nice just to be able to post and put out what you really feel, and then not be manipulated and dictated by the response, because that does literally bastardize what sometimes you set out to put across. That's not a swear word, is it? No, it's not. Fine. Good.
Yeah, I think I just want to throw in mine for a second. I feel it's just eliminated discourse in the grand scheme of things. It's just become so easy to just push a button and then walk away, as opposed to have to actually figure out how to engage and sort of move a conversation forward and a bunch of different things.
Well, how many times, and be honest, audience, have you liked something but you didn't actually read it? Tell the truth.
Yeah.
Well, that's what's most frustrating about that button, because I've literally seen people get in an entire debate about an article that was actually from 2 years ago, thinking it was today because someone posted it who also didn't read it, and then got a bunch of likes on it. And it was like, wow, this is like a weird spinning thing that we're doing here, and it's all because no one actually dug deeper. And so that to me, I don't know. I still like the like button, but I think how we use it we should be more mindful of how we use it and why we're using it.
Well, and I think we have to look at each new technology innovation, and the like button was that. Is this generally helpful or is it generally hurtful? And sometimes you have to step back and say, well, we've looked at this and said it's not so great for these reasons, so we're going to try something else. I think that the important thing is that the internet and the tools on it and the places on it continue to evolve to keep pace with society. And at the moment, they're outpacing society. And so the question is, how do you reel it back, take a pause and say, well, this is actually a lot of fun and interesting, but it's wasting a lot of people's time and it's harming other people. Mm-hmm. And so maybe it's not such a great idea.
I would just like them to keep the retweet button. That's been very helpful in activism. But other than that, I can leave the likes.
We only have 1 minute left. This has gone to a pretty dark place, up and down in this conversation. Give us something optimistic to end on. Give us something something good about the internet that sort of you do or you want to make sure other people do.
Well, I mean, as you mentioned at the very beginning, before we all went to a darker place, was the fact that great social movements have occurred because of the internet, and people who were never given any kind of microphone, again, as you sort of mentioned, people from around the world. For the first time ever, I'm learning about activists in Sudan and Chile and all the nuances of the ways in which people are being oppressed. That is an incredible part of engaging us in a world outside of our own. And so it is a phenomenal tool for education. Human beings just have this extraordinary, relentless capacity to destroy absolutely anything. But we can also create and invent and fix things beautifully. And so I think we just need more of these kinds of people and less of those kinds of people.
Well, and I think it's...
Not you. We're all very nice.
That person. But, look, I think this is the most important and meaningful invention since the development of language. It is transforming our planet. It's bringing people together. It's removing barriers. Obviously, there's some rough stuff around the way, just like the real world is. But kids who are growing up not on the internet are effectively functionally illiterate. And my generation grew up learning more about our world from television than from school. And the generations from now on are going to learn more about their world for the internet, which is why we need to, as adults, take care of it and provide a wonderful future for our kids and for their kids.
Shoot, like I started with. Oh, sorry. Pause.
Might have to be the note that we end on.
Oh. Totally fine.
I'm sorry.
Totally fine.
Okay.
Thank you much.
Great job, Raffi and panelists. Thank you all so much. What was funny about curating the questions that were coming in during that panel is that the questions would come in and then almost immediately, without even putting them to the panelists seemed to be answering them. So our poll question for this particular session is, how do we best manage the viral power of the internet for positive outcomes? There are 5 choices there. Should we go with government regulation, policy enforcement by the internet companies, citizen-based control? I think what that means is essentially self-policing, peer pressure. Long-term cultural change, wow, okay. So basically we need to change all of society in order to control this problem, which might be a fair point, or there is no solution. Okay, we're going to take another video now, and then we'll be back in a couple of minutes with our next panel.